I'm writing this because I think I'm losing my mind, or maybe I've already lost it. If you're reading this on some late-night binge looking for a quick scare, I envy you. I envy the fact that you can turn off your screen, roll over, and go to sleep in a world that makes sense. Because for the last 6 months, my world hasn't made sense. And to this day, I still don't know how to explain what happened to me. I just know that the geometry of the world is a lie, and something is hiding in the angles we can't see. My name is David. I'm 28, an accountant, and up until recently, the most boring person you could ever meet. I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in demons, and I certainly didn't believe in whatever the hell is out there in the Blackwood Valley. It started with a letter from an estate lawyer. My great-aunt Eleanor had passed away. I hadn't seen her since I was 6. She was the family eccentric, a former architect who became a total recluse in the early 90s, moving to a massive custom-built property deep in the Oregon Cascades. She left the property to me. Everything else went to charity. I was struggling with rent in Seattle, so a free house, even a remote one, felt like a lottery win. The plan was simple: drive down, spend a week assessing the property, clear out the junk, and put it on the market. I was so naive. I was so incredibly naive. The drive was exhausting. Blackwood Valley isn't on Google Maps. The lawyer gave me physical coordinates and a set of hand-drawn directions that looked like they belonged in the 1800s. Turn left at the split pine, follow the ridge for 3 miles. That kind of thing. By the time I breached the valley, it was late afternoon, and the fog had already rolled in. It wasn't normal fog. It was thick, clinging to the towering Douglas firs like wet cotton. The silence of the place hit me before I even turned off the engine. You know how forests are supposed to sound? Birds, wind, insects. There was none of that. Just a flat, dead quiet that made my ears ring. Then, I saw the house. Eleanor was an architect, and it showed, but not in a good way. The house was a sprawling, multi-story monstrosity of dark wood and black glass, but looking at it made my eyes water. The angles were wrong. From the driveway, the left wing looked aggressively sharp, jutting out like a spearhead, but the roofline sloped in a way that defied gravity. It looked like a building that was trying to fold in on itself. I shook off the unease, grabbed my duffel bag, and unlocked the heavy oak front door. The inside was immaculate, not a speck of dust, but the air was freezing, far colder than it was outside, and it smelled faintly of ozone and old pennies. Copper and electricity. I spent the first few hours just trying to map the place out in my head, and that's when I noticed the first impossible thing. I was standing in the main living room, looking at the eastern wall. There was a large, beautiful bay window looking out into the dense forest. But right next to it, on the exact same flat wall, was an interior door. I opened the door expecting a closet. Instead, it was a long, windowless hallway stretching into darkness. I stepped back. I looked at the window, then at the hallway. It didn't make architectural sense. If the window was looking outside, the hallway behind that door should have been jutting out into the yard. But I had just been outside. The eastern wall of the house was completely flat. There was no extension. Where the hell did this hallway go? I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The air pressure shifted immediately. Have you ever descended quickly in an airplane? It felt exactly like that. My ears popped and a heavy weight settled on my chest. I walked for what felt like 2 minutes. Just bare drywall and hardwood floor. Finally, it ended at a solid black door. I turned the brass knob. It was locked. As I stood there in the dead silence of that impossible hallway, I heard a sound from the other side of the black door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was slow, deliberate, and low to the ground, like a large dog dragging its claws against the wood. But it wasn't trying to get out. The scratching was coming from my side of the door. Something was at my feet. I shined the flashlight down. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the scratching continued, echoing right next to my boots. I didn't run, but I walked backward very fast until I burst back into the living room, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it. I dragged a heavy armchair in front of it. I told myself it was mice in the walls. I told myself the weird architecture was just an optical illusion. I lied to myself because the sun had gone down, and I was 4 hours away from civilization. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the master bedroom on the second floor, wrapped in a sleeping bag, gripping a tire iron I brought up from my car. At 2:13 a.m., the whispering started. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the vents. At first, it was just a chaotic murmur, like a crowded room. But slowly, the voices coalesced into a single, distinct tone. "David." My breath caught in my throat. "David, sweetie, can you open the door? It's so cold out here." It was my mother's voice. My mother died of pancreatic cancer when I was 19. I held her hand as she passed in a sterile hospital room in Spokane. But this voice, the inflection, the slight Midwestern drawl, it was perfect. "David," she whispered again, and this time the voice wasn't in the vent. It was directly outside my bedroom door. "I brought your favorite, the blueberry muffins. Just open the door, Davy." Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. Every instinct I had screamed at me to go to her, but a deeper, primal terror pinned me to the mattress. "You're not real," I whispered into the dark. The voice outside the door stopped. For a long, agonizing minute, there was nothing. Then, the voice spoke again, but it wasn't my mother's anymore. It was mine. "You're not real," my own voice mocked from the hallway, sounding perfectly flat, devoid of any emotion. "You're not real. You're not real. You're not real." It started repeating the phrase, faster and faster, layering over itself until it sounded like a choir of my own voice screaming in the hallway. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezed my eyes shut, and prayed for daylight. When dawn broke, the house was silent. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't care about the clothes or the laptop I'd left in the living room. I just grabbed my keys, bolted down the stairs, and threw myself into my car. I slammed it into gear and tore down the dirt driveway, kicking up rocks and mud. I just needed to hit the main road. I just needed to see another human being. I drove for 20 minutes. The trees whipped past, a blur of green and brown. But something was wrong. The road wasn't curving. It was supposed to wind down the mountain. Instead, it was dead straight, bordered by an impenetrable wall of pines. 30 minutes, 40 minutes. My gas tank was at 3/4. Then, up ahead, the fog parted. I saw a clearing. I hit the brakes, a sob of relief escaping my throat. But as the car skidded to a halt, the relief turned to ash in my mouth. I was looking at the back of my great-aunt's house. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't taken a single fork in the road. I drove in a straight line for 40 minutes, and it spit me right back out where I started. Space was looping. The valley wasn't just remote, it was a closed circuit. I was trapped. I spent the next 2 days trying every conceivable way to leave. I tried walking into the woods with a compass. The needle spun wildly, pointing everywhere and nowhere. After walking in a straight line for an hour, I found myself stumbling out of the tree line and onto the front porch. The house wanted me there, and the longer I stayed, the more the house changed. The geometry started shifting when I wasn't looking. I'd walk into the kitchen, turn around to grab a glass, and the doorway I just walked through would be gone, replaced by a solid brick wall. I'd have to find a new way out, wandering through rooms I had never seen before, rooms that didn't fit the floor plan. A library with books entirely in unrecognizable geometric symbols. A greenhouse filled with dead black floor that smelled like rotting meat. I was losing weight. I was losing my mind. The entity that mimicked voices never showed itself, but it was always there. It started mimicking the sound of my own footsteps, walking exactly one pace behind me. If I stopped, it took an extra step before stopping. Tap, tap, tap. On the 4th day, I broke down the black door at the end of the impossible hallway. I don't know why I did it. Desperation? Madness? I took the tire iron and smashed the lock until the wood splintered and gave way. The door swung inward, revealing a small circular room bathed in a sickly yellow luminescence. There were no light fixtures. The light seemed to weep from the walls themselves. In the center of the room was a small wooden desk. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal. I approached it slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I opened the cover. The handwriting was neat, precise, architectural. October 14th, 1994. It was Aunt Eleanor's journal. I began to read. The angles are hungry. I thought I could build a sanctuary. I thought if I calculated the precise sacred geometry, I could create a space that the world couldn't touch. But I built a snare. I pierced a membrane that shouldn't have been pierced. They don't have bodies, not really. They are concepts. They are predatory dimensions. And they are leaking in. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting grew more frantic, the ink smudged with what looked like dried blood and tears. She wrote about the house changing, about the voices, about the looping roads. Then, I reached the middle of the book. The handwriting changed. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't Eleanor's handwriting anymore. It was mine. It was my distinct, messy, left-handed scrawl. I read the first entry in my handwriting. It was dated 4 days ago. The day I arrived. The drive was exhausting. Blackwood Valley isn't on Google Maps. The fog is so thick here. The house looks wrong. The angles hurt my eyes. I dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I picked it back up with trembling hands and skipped ahead. It chronicled everything. My mother's voice at the door. The looping road. The footsteps behind me. It was all there, written in my own hand, in a book that had been locked in a room for 30 years. I flipped to the very last page with writing on it. It was dated for tomorrow. The walls are breathing. The lights are dead. The architect has finally shown itself. It doesn't want my body. It wants my space. It wants to occupy my coordinates in reality. If I don't make it to the basement hatch by 3:33 a.m., I will become part of the architecture. I have to run when the clock chimes. Below that, scrawled in frantic, tearing strokes, was a map. A crude drawing of the house's shifting layout, showing a path from the master bedroom to a hidden hatch in the basement. I stared at the page. The ink was still wet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom, the journal clutched in my hands, staring at my watch. The house was angry. It knew I had the book. The walls began to pulsate. Literally, the drywall bowed inward and outward, like a massive lung taking shallow, raspy breaths. The temperature plummeted until I could see my breath in the dark. 3 a.m. The noises started. Not whispers this time. Screams. Horrific, guttural screams echoing from the vents, sounding like animals being torn apart. The house was trying to paralyze me with fear. 3:15 a.m. The door to the bedroom slowly creaked open. I raised my flashlight. Standing in the hallway was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was tall, too tall. Its head scraped the ceiling. But it wasn't a solid creature. It looked like a glitch in reality. A silhouette made of static and bent light. Wherever it stood, the hallway behind it warped and stretched, like a panoramic photo where the person moved while it was being taken. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless plane of shifting gray static. But I could feel it looking at me. It felt incredibly heavy, a localized gravitational pull that made my teeth ache. David, it said. It wasn't mimicking a voice anymore. It sounded like two massive stones grinding together, speaking in a frequency that vibrated deep in my chest. You are structurally unsound. Let us correct you. 3:30 a.m. It took a step into the room. Space folded around its leg. The distance between the door and my bed suddenly halved. 3:32 a.m. I gripped the tire iron and the journal. I looked at the map. According to the drawing, I had to jump out the bedroom window to land on a roof segment that didn't exist in reality, but would exist at exactly 3:33 a.m. 3:33 a.m. The digital numbers on my watch flipped. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself backward, crashing through the glass of the second-story window. I braced for the 70-foot fall to the backyard. Instead, I slammed onto a hard wooden surface just 5 feet below the window. I looked around, gasping for air. I was standing on an interior staircase. I had jumped out a window and landed inside the house. The geometry had completely fractured. Run! My own voice screamed from the journal in my mind. I scrambled down the stairs. The house was tearing itself apart. Hallways stretched into infinity. Doors opened to reveal voids of absolute, starry blackness. Gravity shifted constantly. One moment I was running down a hall. The next I was crawling up a wall to reach a door that was now on the ceiling. The entity was behind me. I didn't have to look. I could feel the space collapsing in its wake. The air grew dense, feeling like water. My lungs burned. I navigated by the map. Left at the grandfather clock that ticks backward. Through the fireplace. Down the corridor that smells like copper. The grinding, static voice echoed from everywhere at once. Stay. Become the foundation. Become the wall. I burst through a door and tumbled down a flight of concrete stairs, landing violently on a cold dirt floor. The basement. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. There, in the center of the room, hidden beneath an old rug, was a heavy iron hatch. The entity breached the basement door at the top of the stairs. The concrete steps warped and twisted as it descended, defying physics. The cold was absolute now. Frost coated my eyelashes. I grabbed the iron ring of the hatch and pulled. It was rusted shut. No, 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 please! I screamed, pulling with every ounce of strength I had left. My muscles tore. Blood seeped from my palms. The static entity loomed over me. Its featureless face bent down. Space compressed. I felt my bones groan under the impossible pressure. My vision started to go dark at the edges. I looked at the journal, dropped beside me on the dirt. The map page had flipped over. There was one final sentence on the back. The hatch opens inward. I stopped pulling. I slammed my fist down onto the iron hatch with everything I had left. The hatch gave way with a sickening crunch. I fell through the floor. I hit soft earth. I lay there in the pitch black, gasping, waiting for the static entity to rip through the hole above me. I waited for the pressure, for the voices, for the impossible geometry. Nothing happened. I smelled pine needles. I smelled damp soil. I felt a cool, normal breeze on my face. I slowly sat up and fumbled for my flashlight. I turned it on. I wasn't in a basement. I was sitting in a ditch on the side of Interstate 90. Cars were whizzing by in the pre-dawn light. Normal cars, normal people. A massive green highway sign a few hundred yards away read, Spokane 50 miles. I scrambled up the embankment and just collapsed on the shoulder, laughing and sobbing hysterically until a state trooper pulled over. I told them I had gotten lost hiking. I told them my car broke down. I didn't tell them about the house, or the journal, or the entity. They wouldn't have believed me. They took me to a hospital in Spokane. The police went looking for my car based on the coordinates the lawyer gave me. 3 days later, a detective came to my hospital room. He looked confused, irritated. He told me the coordinates were for a patch of dense, untouched forest. No roads, no clearing, and absolutely no house. He said there were no property records for an Aunt Eleanor in that county. He said the estate lawyer I named didn't exist in any registry. They thought I had a psychotic break. Maybe I did. That's what my therapist tells me. A stress-induced fugue state, complete with vivid hallucinations. It's a neat, comforting explanation. But there are two problems with that theory. First, when they found me in the ditch, my clothes were covered in a thick layer of dust that lab tests showed was over a century old, mixed with traces of oxidized copper. And second, the journal. I still have it. The police didn't take it because it just looked like a blank, leather-bound book to them. But when I look at it, the writing is still there. My handwriting, documenting a nightmare that supposedly never happened. I live in a small apartment in Chicago now, far away from the woods. I try to live a normal life. I go to work. I buy groceries. I try to sleep. But things aren't right. I'm not right. Sometimes when I'm tired, I'll look down a long hallway at my office, and for a split second, the perspective is wrong. It stretches just a little too far. Sometimes when I turn off the lights in my bathroom, the reflection in the mirror doesn't turn away as fast as I do. And last night is why I'm finally writing this down. why I'm putting this out onto the internet. A warning maybe, or maybe just a desperate plea for someone to tell me I'm not alone. I was lying in bed. My apartment is on the 4th floor of a busy street. It's never truly quiet. But around 3 a.m., the traffic sounds faded. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The dead, flat silence of Blackwood Valley filled my bedroom. I didn't open my eyes. I was too terrified. Then, right beside my ear, standing in a space that shouldn't exist between my bed and the wall, I heard a voice. It was my voice, perfectly flat, devoid of emotion. "We are still building, David. We just needed you to carry the blueprints out for us." I haven't slept since. I don't think I ever will again. Because I realize now, I didn't escape the house. I brought it with me, and its walls are expanding.
Before you leave, if you like this story and want more like this, please subscribe and smash that like button. That helps the channel greatly and helps us keep bringing you amazing stories like this.